I never thought I'd be scared to go to work. I remember saying that once quietly to myself in my car, parked outside the office building. It was one of those mornings when I couldn't get my hand off the steering wheel. I just sat there, engine off, watching the door like something dangerous waited behind it. And in a way, it did. I got the job right after graduating. Mid-sized marketing agency in Pennsylvania. I was so excited. The office had that open floor plan with fake succulents and a neon sign on the wall that said, "Create like a champion." It felt like opportunity. I was 24, full of ideas, and ready to make something of myself. At first, I didn't notice anything. Not really. People were polite. Smiles, handshakes, "Welcome aboard, man." I was the only black person in the whole department, but I didn't think about that. Not at first. I told myself this was normal, that it didn't matter, that it wouldn't matter. But it did. It started with little things. Microaggressions, I think they're called. I'd make a suggestion in a meeting, and no one would respond, until 2 minutes later, when Brad said the same thing, and suddenly it was brilliant. Or someone would play urban music when I walked into the break room, and say, "Hey, this one's for you." Stupid, small things. But they chipped at you. And then came the comments. Jokes that weren't jokes. My manager once asked if I ever got tired of being so articulate all the time. I didn't even know how to respond. Another coworker, Emily, once told me I reminded her of a character from a movie, and when I asked who, she said, that one black guy. The funny one. I forget his name. She laughed. I smiled. I hated myself for that, because smiling felt safer. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was being sensitive, that they didn't mean anything by it. I needed this job. So I worked harder, stayed later, volunteered for every project. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to say I didn't belong. But it wasn't enough. My manager, Paul, never yelled. He didn't need to. He just looked through me, would cut me off mid-sentence, assign group tasks, and leave me out. Once I spent 2 weeks preparing a pitch, and when the day came, he handed it to someone else to present. Said I needed to focus on support roles. Support roles. That night, I didn't sleep. There was this meeting 6 months into the job that I'll never forget. We were brainstorming for a campaign, and I threw out an idea. Something creative, something I was proud of. Paul looked at me and said, "That's a little aggressive, don't you think?" The room went silent, and then people laughed. Laughed like it was a joke. Like I was a joke. I laughed too, quietly, because what else was I supposed to do? That night I cried in the shower. First time in years. Couldn't tell my mom. Couldn't tell my friends. Didn't want to sound like I was playing the race card. I hated that phrase, playing the race card, like it was some game I wanted to win. I started having trouble eating. My stomach felt tight all the time. I got headaches, weird chest pressure. The kind that made you think you were dying. One morning, I fainted brushing my teeth. Just collapsed. My roommate found me on the floor. I told the doctor it was dehydration. It wasn't. It was panic. I started waking up with my heart already racing. I'd sit up in bed, sweaty, like someone had been chasing me in a dream I couldn't remember. Just the idea of walking into that office made my whole body tense. I'd feel lightheaded, breathless, like I was being smothered by something invisible. I Googled panic attacks. Every symptom matched, but I still went in. I still smiled. I still laughed at the jokes, until I couldn't anymore. There was this day. I don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe it was when someone asked if I was affirmative action. Or when Paul said, "This isn't the place for activism," after I mentioned a DEI event happening nearby. Whatever it was, I went to the bathroom, locked the stall, and just sat there shaking. Not crying, not yelling, just shaking. Like my body had finally decided it didn't want to carry the weight anymore. That night, I emailed HR. No response. 2 days later, I handed him my resignation. Paul barely blinked. Just said, "Well, I hope you find something that fits your energy better." Energy. Like it was all about vibes. I walked out of that building and sat in my car again. Same spot. Same steering wheel. But this time, I didn't feel stuck. I felt free. I didn't have another job lined up. No plan. No backup. But for the first time in a year, I could breathe. I don't know what's next. But I know what I won't do again. Pretend I'm comfortable being disrespected just because the paycheck clears. I'm not angry. I'm not even bitter. I'm just done carrying shame that doesn't belong to me. I thought quitting would fix everything. It didn't. Sure, the panic attacks stopped for a while. But the silence that came after, it was loud. My days stretched out like cold, gray highways with no destination. I'd wake up and not know what to do with myself. No meetings, no fake laughs, no walking on eggshells. Just stillness. And the guilt of it. I started wondering if maybe I had overreacted. It's wild how your brain does that, how it tries to gaslight you into thinking abuse wasn't that bad just because you survived it. I'd replay moments in my head, trying to figure out if maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe if I just worked a little harder, smiled a little wider. But no, I remembered that look in Paul's eyes when I spoke, like my presence was a disruption, a challenge to something he didn't want questioned. And I remember the nights I'd lay awake thinking, what if it's always like this? I tried applying to other jobs, but even just updating my resume felt like a trigger. I'd get as far as opening LinkedIn, and my chest would tighten. I didn't trust any place to be better. Didn't trust myself not to get trapped again. I didn't want to walk into another building and be the diversity guy. I didn't want to be hired because of a box someone needed to check. I wanted to be seen. Really seen. I started journaling. Something my therapist suggested. Yeah, I got a therapist. Her name's Tasha. First session, I couldn't even speak. Just sat there with my hands in my lap while she waited. Not pressured. Just waited. Eventually, I told her everything. She didn't flinch. Didn't look surprised. She said, "You're not crazy. You're exhausted." And I started crying. Not because of what she said, but because someone finally named it. Exhaustion. That's what racism in polite company feels like. Not violence. Not shouting. Not slurs. Just constant, relentless exhaustion. The kind that eats your voice. Makes you second-guess your smile. The kind that wears a mask called professionalism and expects you to thank it for not being worse. One night, I posted on Reddit. An anonymous story. Just what I'd gone through. I didn't think anyone would read it, but the replies flooded in. Hundreds. People who'd lived the same thing. Black professionals. Women. LGBTQ folks. People with disabilities. So many stories that sounded like mine, just wearing different clothes. I wasn't alone. That did something to me. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me context. Perspective. What happened to me wasn't an isolated storm, it was part of a system. A pattern. And I had stepped out of it before it swallowed me whole. Tasha helped me name something else, too. Internalized blame. I kept asking what I did wrong. She kept reminding me that the real question was, why do they keep getting away with it? It's not easy. Healing never is. But slowly, I started reclaiming myself. I began freelancing. Small gigs. Designing logos, writing copy. At first, it felt scary, not knowing where the next check would come from, but it also felt clean. Like I wasn't sacrificing a piece of my soul for every dollar. I made my own schedule. Set my own rates. Chose who I worked with. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread Mondays. I even reconnected with some old college friends. We talked about the jobs we had, the people we'd become. One of them, Jordan, told me about a black-owned agency he joined. Said they were hiring. Said they believed in mentoring, not managing. Said they celebrated culture instead of tolerating it. I told him I'd think about it. I'm still thinking. Not because I'm scared anymore, but because I finally realized I have options. I have worth. And I don't need to be grateful for scraps just because they're offered with a smile. I look back at the guy I was a year ago, sitting in his car, paralyzed by the idea of walking into work, and I want to hug him. Tell him it's not weakness to leave. Tell him he deserves better. Tell him he's not the problem. I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way. The offer letter sat in my inbox for 2 whole days before I opened it. Jordan had sent it with a simple message: no pressure. But I think you'd thrive here. That word, thrive. Not survive. Not endure. Thrive. It hit different. I stared at the screen for a while, remembering all the times I'd tried to make myself smaller just to fit. All the energy I'd wasted explaining myself, managing people's comfort, trying to prove I belonged in rooms that treated me like a guest. I didn't want to go back into the same game. But maybe this wasn't the same game. This agency. It wasn't performative. It didn't have diversity and inclusion printed on coffee mugs while treating actual people like afterthoughts. I had spoken to some of the team on a Zoom call Jordan set up, and I remember one woman, Imani, saying, "We don't expect perfection. We expect truth." I didn't even know that was allowed in the workplace. Truth? But I wanted it. Badly. So I signed. My first day wasn't perfect. I was nervous, my voice shaky on intros, and I kept waiting for that moment, that subtle shift when people realize you're not one of them. But it never came. Instead, Imani sent me a Slack message that said, "We're lucky to have you here. You bring something real." I sat there staring at it longer than I should have. I didn't know how to receive kindness like that. It felt like trying to walk after your leg's been in a cast for months. Awkward. Wobbly. But damn, it felt good. I started to settle in. Not hide, settle. We had team meetings where people actually listened. Where disagreement wasn't weaponized. Where being different wasn't just accepted, it was the point. And slowly, my chest stopped tightening in mornings. I began sleeping again. Laughing again. Creating again. There was one moment I think I'll always carry. It was during a brand brainstorm. We were discussing tone, identity, representation. Someone brought up a campaign they loved, and I, without thinking, pointed out how it lacked nuance in its portrayal of black fatherhood. Silence fell. Old me would have panicked. But then Jordan jumped in. "That's a good point. We should rethink that angle. No defensiveness. No awkward glances. Just respect." I almost teared up. That's how low the bar had been set for so long, that being heard felt like a miracle. That night, I called my mom. She asked how the new job was. I told her, it feels like I can finally breathe again. And she went quiet, then said, "You deserve that, baby. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I don't know what's next for me, not really. Maybe I'll stay at this agency for years. Maybe I'll build something of my own someday. But whatever I do, I'll do it as someone who no longer questions his own worth. Someone who knows that peace is not a luxury, it's a right. I look in the mirror now, and I see someone whole. Not someone trying to prove, impress, or appease. Just a man who knows where he's been, who he is, and what he'll never tolerate again. And to anyone out there still stuck in a job, a place, a mindset that makes you feel small, I see you. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining it. You're not the problem. And you don't have to wait until you break to walk away. You can leave. You can heal. You can rebuild. And when you do, you'll realize, maybe for the first time, that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. Story 2, we escaped a war. But America wasn't ready to welcome us. I still remember the way my daughter gripped my hand at the airport. Her fingers were small, cold, and shaking, not from the Ohio winter, but from everything we had left behind. The war in Ukraine took our home, our neighbors, my brother. It didn't take our bodies, but it tried to take our souls. And for a while it almost did. When we landed in the U.S., I thought the worst was over. My name is Oleg. I used to be an engineer in Kharkiv. I had a team, a future. Now I was a refugee with 2 suitcases, 2 children, and a wife who hadn't smiled in weeks. But I had hope. I thought maybe America would give us peace. Just peace. That was all I wanted. We were placed in a small town in Ohio. Not a city, not even a suburb. A place with more silos than streetlights. Our sponsor family greeted us with warm jackets, casseroles, and the kind of smiles that feel like apologies. For the first few weeks, I was grateful for everything. Grateful for silence. For the absence of sirens. For tap water I didn't have to boil. But then came the whispers. First at the grocery store. Then at the gas station. Once at the post office, a man in a camo hat said to me, "Must be nice, living off our tax money." I didn't answer. I barely understood. But his tone said enough. I got a job cleaning floors in a hardware store. It wasn't engineering, but I was proud. I showed up early, left late. My hands hurt every night, but it was honest work. Still, the boss never looked me in the eye. My coworkers ignored me unless something went wrong. Once when a register froze, someone joked, "Must be the Ukrainian virus." They laughed. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was safer. At home, I didn't tell my wife. She already had enough. She worked nights at a diner where customers spoke slowly and loudly to her, as if volume translated meaning. Katia, our daughter, was bullied at school for her accent. My son Maxim stopped speaking altogether in class. The worst part, I started to believe them. That we were burdens. That we didn't belong. Every morning before work, I'd sit in the parking lot and feel my chest tighten. My hands would sweat. My breathing would speed up. I Googled heart attack symptoms 3 times before I realized it was panic. I was having panic attacks just from walking into work. One day, a manager yelled at me for restocking the wrong shelf. I had followed the chart exactly, but his face was red, and his finger was in my face, and something in me snapped. I went to the back room, took off my uniform, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. That night, I cried in the bathroom so my kids wouldn't hear. Then something strange happened. A man named Brian, who had once watched me mop floors without a word, showed up at our door. He had heard I quit. He handed me a flyer. It was for a local engineering firm. "They're looking for people," he said. "Real workers." I didn't know if it was kindness or guilt, but I applied. 2 weeks later, I had my first interview in English. I was sweating through my shirt. My accent made me stumble. But when they handed me a sample project, I completed it in half the time. They hired me. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible. I was a colleague, a contributor. I started biking to work again like I used to in Kharkiv. My back straightened. I smiled without forcing it. But the neighbors still weren't warm. One woman crossed the street when she saw us walking. Another yelled at my wife for speaking Ukrainian at the park. "This is America. Speak English." Then one night, someone threw a brick through our window. Wrapped in it was a note that said, "Go home." Katia screamed. Maxim started crying. My wife sank to the floor and rocked back and forth. I didn't call the police. I didn't believe they'd care. But the next morning, something changed. There was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Alvarez from down the street. She was holding a pan of lasagna. Behind her were 3 other neighbors. One brought groceries. One brought a small Ukrainian flag. One offered to fix the window. "We're so sorry," Mrs. Alvarez said. "That's not who we are."